Greetings and salutations, it is I, Mr. Nothing, the museum curator of the weird and the strange and the host who might be a ghost. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels time traveling through the Antebellum South. Today I wanted to talk about a book that I read, a book that focuses on time travel and slavery. I will be talking about Kindred by Octavia Butler. You see the cover, it is a woman I presume is a slave. It tells you exactly what to expect. And it's an interesting book. I did like it, and I'll tell you why as we go along. I wanted to check out a book like this just because I haven't really talked about many Black authors on my channel. I've talked about a couple of Black poets, but I haven't really focused on any books, and I feel like that's just because I'm not really aware of too many Black authors, and that's something that I definitely have to fix, a blind spot in my cultural experience, so I can get that kind of perspective in my reading. For those that don't know, Octavia Butler, I was well aware of her name, but I hadn't read any of her books. She wrote a couple standalone novels like this, and she's dabbled in speculative fiction, science fiction, but she's also written a couple series, including one that I believe is called the Pathfinder series, which I don't know what it's about. It's sci-fi, and I think it's sci-fi from a Black perspective, which again, is something that you typically don't see in science fiction. A lot of it is focused on white people. With the exception of maybe Star Trek and a couple other things, but I was really excited to finally be able to read something of hers, and it was really powerful. Something I found this at my local library. Always surprised when my local library, again, patronize your local library, but I'm always surprised when my local library has a book from a diverse author, because again, living in a conservative town, they have a lot of very conservative conspiracy theory kind of books, just from utter trash people, and so I wouldn't expect really the opposite, especially as a lot of people are closed-minded in conservative Washington. But that's not the case. So luckily I found this, and I enjoyed reading it. So let's talk about it. Without further ado, I'll do a little summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. So Kindred starts exactly when it was published, so the 1970s. It takes place in 1976. Dana and Kevin are an interracial couple. Dana is Black and Kevin is white, and they are having a conversation in their house when Dana finds herself transported across time to a river location. She sees a small child drowning, and she chooses to save him. And before she can do anything else, a man shows up with a rifle and points it at her, and she travels back to the present, where Kevin and her are very confused about what happened, but they are like, we should just forget about it and move on. A very short while later, Dana is again transported across time to the Baltimore area. She finds herself in a house with a small boy, the boy from the river location who was drowning, and he is setting his house on fire as a way of getting back at his father for something. And Dana tells him, knock it off, don't do that. And so she manages to help him out there. She learns that the boy's name is Rufus. And later, at the same time, she meets Alice Greenwood at her cabin, and she discovers that Rufus and Alice are her ancestors. And so she's traveling back in time to save Rufus whenever he does something really stupid or is getting injured, and so she can prevent him from dying, so she can be born eventually. So while she's at Alice Greenwood's cabin, some patrols show up, which are the beta version of the KKK. And they're like, well, you better be staying in your cabin because we're watching you and stuff like that. Dana tries to get out, and go somewhere else. But one of the patrols follows her and attempts to rape her, and once again, because she's in danger, she's transported back to the present. And then Dana again begins to feel as though she's traveling back in time, and so she grabs onto Kevin, and he comes with her. And so they're transported to the time when Rufus, who's a little bit older at this time, has broken his leg, and so they go get help. And when they come back with Rufus's father, Tom Whalen, because they're on the Whalen plantation, Tom agrees to let Kevin and Dana stay at the plantation for a little while, because of how they helped Rufus. And so Tom sees Kevin as Dana's master. Dana is a slave because she's black, and this is 1815. What else would she be at this time? Feels a little racist to say that, but that's exactly what was going on back then. And so she has to pretend to be a slave, although Rufus kind of understands that it's different because he knows she's time traveling, and she doesn't speak like the typical slave does. Nobody seems to point out that they're wearing anachronistic clothes or like anything like that, but I guess people are willing to ignore anything as long as it keeps them sane. So Dana and Kevin kind of hatch a little plan. Since they're going to be helping Rufus, they should help mentor him too, and help him become more empathetic and understand the plight of slaves and become a better person that way, so he doesn't end up like his father, who is kind of a garbage human who whips slaves and just separates families all willy-nilly. Family separation is pretty bad in the past and in the present. They stay a little while at the plantation, but Tom eventually sees Dana trying to teach one of the other slaves how to read, and he starts beating her to the point where she almost dies, and she travels forward back in time. However, Kevin doesn't come with her. That is pretty bad. And she stays in the present for a little bit. Nothing is going wrong there. But she still misses Kevin. Shortly, she is again transported back in time, and she finds that Rufus is getting his ass kicked by a black slave, and a woman is watching, and that woman is Alice. It turns out that Rufus had tried to rape Alice, and her husband, Isaac, started kicking Rufus's butt. But Dana convinces him not to kill Rufus, as that would further endanger their lives. But so they manage to flee while Dana gets help for Rufus again, and Tom kind of recognizes Dana but doesn't really know how she managed to disappear. Again, the active forgetting part, so you don't realize the horror. Dana discovers that Kevin went north because it's been 5 years at this point, so he's kind of trapped in the past. Dana and Rufus have some conversations about how he loves Alice, and he wants to be with her, although Dana tries to impart knowledge on him that he's her slave master, so she's always going to choose somebody else because that isn't a consenting relationship, and Alice doesn't want that. Some slave catchers eventually manage to capture Isaac and Alice. Isaac is sold into slavery in Mississippi, and Alice is brought back to the Whalen plantation. Eventually, Alice just submits to Rufus because she's kind of beaten to submission that way, where she doesn't really have any other choice. And Dana is kind of terrified at all this. She tries to get Rufus to write a couple letters, but unbeknownst to her, he doesn't send them. And when she discovers that he hasn't, she tries to run away, but Tom manages to find her and bring her back to the plantation. She has no freedom at this point. And Rufus seemed active in trying to capture her too. But Tom, as a sort of gift to Dana, writes a letter to Kevin, and Kevin comes back, and they have a reunion, and Dana just wants off the plantation and away from Rufus, who's a terrible human at this point. And Rufus points a gun at both of them and it says, "You're not getting off this plantation. I need you, Dana." Like Rufus really wants Dana to a toxic point. And that threat, again, that danger that he puts her in, allows her to time travel with Kevin back to the present. The next time that Dana feels like she's drifting off into the past, she grabs her to-go bag, but she doesn't let Kevin go with her. She doesn't want him to experience that again. And so Dana shows up in the past, where at this point Rufus is still a butt. Tom dies and Rufus kind of blames Dana for letting him die. He sends her to the fields where she's kind of abused and as punishment, and she has no recourse for getting out of that. He sees that Rufus is mistreating Alice, just being very domineering in their relationship and giving Alice no say, and she's clearly unhappy. And it gets to the point where Dana finally says enough and goes inside the house and slits her wrist. She's sent forward in time again back home, and it almost kills her, but she's able to survive with the help of a doctor that doesn't talk about her cutting her wrist. She has a conversation with Kevin about what needs to be done next, because Rufus is clearly a monster. And at this point, Alice has given birth to the two kids who will carry on the family name, and so she doesn't have to worry about not being born anymore. Again, she travels back in time without Kevin, and Rufus is very happy to see her. But at this point, they both see that Alice has committed suicide. She's hung herself. She does not want to be with Rufus, and it's pretty clear at this point. And Rufus and Alice are talking in the house, where Rufus and Dana are talking in the house, and Dana's talking about how she wants to go home. She doesn't want to be here anymore. There's nothing left for her at this plantation, and Rufus needs to grow up, really, and be a better slave holder, because he has the plantation now. Be a better slave master to everybody, because if he isn't, the slaves are going to lose their families and maybe even their lives. And so Rufus is adamant that he wants Dana to stay. He believes her to be like Alice, and Alice and Dana share DNA, so I can see how he would view that. But also he's her great-grandfather, so that'd be really weird. And Dana realizes there's only one thing she can do, because Rufus is never going to let her leave willingly, and he's become somewhat of a monster. And so finally she does the only thing she can do, and she stabs him with a knife, thus killing him. And she's transported to the present, where her arm ends up in a wall, and that they have to cut off her arm because of the damage. And the story ends with them going to a historical society in Baltimore to really verify that these people actually existed, and that benefits Dana and Kevin in some way. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's one big question at the center of this story, and that is, can you make someone a better person? Can you make someone less racist, more empathetic towards others through a mentoring relationship? Especially when society has countering messages that say that certain people are below others, and that you're free to do with one people as you want. There's a good quote that I would like to read to you. "As I hurried up the steps and into the house, I thought of Rufus and his father, of Rufus becoming his father. It would happen someday, in at least one way. Someday Rufus would own the plantation. Someday he would be the slaveholder, responsible in his own right for what happened to the people who lived in those half-hidden cabins. The boy was literally growing up as I watched. Growing up because I watched and because I helped to keep him safe. I was the worst possible guardian for him. A black to watch over him in a society that considered blacks subhuman. A woman to watch over him in a society that considered women perennial children. I would have all I could do to look after myself, but I would help him as best as I could, and I would try to keep friendship with him, maybe plant a few ideas in his mind that would help both me and the people who would be his slaves in the years to come. I might even be making things easier for Alice." And so with that passage right there, you really get at the heart of what this story is about. Is it possible for Dana, by mentoring Rufus, to make him a better person, to counter all those messages that he's been sent and make it so that he's not an abusive slaveholder. Maybe he might even be pro-abolition at this point. And that's really where the direction Octavia Butler takes the novel. And the ultimate answer is no, that's actually not possible. Maybe it's because Dana is time traveling and so she's not living Rufus's life with him. But it's definitely clear that she can't get past the messaging that slaves are subservient to white people, that slaves are cattle, that black people do not deserve equal rights as white people. That's being told to Rufus every single day of his life. And it doesn't matter how many times that Dana tries to impart that Alice is a human too, or that Dana herself is a human being who's smart and capable and has saved Rufus's life multiple times. Rufus is never going to understand that, because he has been told his entire life, since he was a very young child, that slavery is totally okay. And that is really what I think Octavia Butler is trying to tell you, that you can fight the environment as much as you want, but it has power over individuals, and it's a strong reason why slavery continued much throughout the 1800s until pretty much the Civil War. So you wonder, like, what other messages are we receiving today that might be telling young people that mistreatment of people of color is okay. You constantly see police officers with immunity from killing black people, often while they're sleeping in their own homes. You see politicians trying to limit the voting rights of people of color. You see people trying to limit the safety net for in a society where often the people at the bottom are people of color. So there's a lot of parallels to today that Octavia Butler may not be trying to actively bring awareness to, but you can definitely see it. And I think that's what makes this good science fiction, is that you can definitely see the parallels in how we haven't quite defeated the evils of slavery, or even the evils of the messaging that society sends, that discrimination and racism is okay. Another thing that I like about this story is how unapologetically terrible Octavia Butler makes Rufus. Throughout his life, there's hope in the beginning of his life that he might change and not turn out like his father. But by the end of his life, he's splitting families up, he's raping slaves, and he's turning against Dana, of all people. Like, he beats her at one point later on in his life, despite the fact that he's been friends with her for his entire life, really. And he's a really, for lack of a better word, he is a shitty character. There is no redemption for Rufus. He absolutely deserves to be stabbed for all of his actions. And I like how Octavia Butler writes that. Maybe she's essentially saying that there is no redemption for slavery. You can't make slavery look good. And a lot of people who were slaveholders, like, they were just bad people. And so Rufus is an interesting character. Again, Octavia Butler makes no attempts to redeem him. She does say that Rufus is lonely and that he is self-destructive, and that helps explain some of his actions in his life, and maybe he didn't have supportive parents in his life, but that never justifies the rape that he does or the beating that he gives Dana in the story. He's a bad person, and Octavia Butler wants you to know that. Another interesting thing about this story is the time travel aspect of it. It's interesting because in order to go back to the past, Rufus has to hurt himself, and Dana has to, fix his injuries, often risking her own life in the process. Meanwhile, in order to go back to the present, Dana's life has to be in severe danger, which I feel like Octavia Butler is trying to say something about how black women have been treated in American society, how they've often had it far worse than black men and any other minority in America. Black women often have to help their oppressors, and they're often made to get them to see the bad side of racism. And that shouldn't be their job. They shouldn't have to get people to see that racism is bad. Those people should already know that. And forcing black women to, help their oppressor, it only makes their lives worse. And you see that especially in modern society where black women are trying to appeal to police officers and conservatives to, maybe don't kill them. Maybe don't oppress black people so much. And that's an interesting aspect of that. And then the other side of it is how, black women have had to put themselves in danger, often at protest or in riots even, trying to make their cause or make their cause known. And so no matter how much Dana tries to help Rufus, she's always sent forward in time when her life is in danger, because that time period was very risky for black women, and it's still risky now. So I think that's intentional on Octavia Butler's part. I might be reading into it a little too much, but it really seems like she's saying something about the plight of black women. Ultimately, I love this story. I thought it was pretty good. It did have moments where it was kind of boring, and it did seem like it delved heavily into trauma porn at times, where it was just intensely focused on, the beating Dana received or that the other slaves received. But I think that's kind of one of the issues that pop up in slave stories in general, and there's no way around that, because you can't whitewash slavery. You have to talk about the bad things that happened. Otherwise, you're doing injustice towards this what happened during slavery in general. So just a few minor issues. I did enjoy it, and I hope to read more of Octavia Butler's books in the future. If you've read this book before, you want to comment on something I said, comment below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this interesting book. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that we can get Octavia Butler out to the masses. She's already there, but let's do it even more. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter so that we can talk about social justice and books and all kinds of fun things like that. And in the meantime, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and antebellum travels. That was weird. Farewell.